Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I saw the statistic of the participant, and I found out people from countries that were not before in our these conferences, especially people from Muslim countries, and I'm very glad for their coming because being multicultural, Islamic people with Islamic background were missing in our collection. So you are very welcome. Very important for the cooperation I'm going to suggest. So what can philosophy contribute in these times of Corona? Some of our colleagues would probably propose to adopt a Stoic attitude for the peace of mind that is supposed to enable. Some would suggest to try to attain such peace in other ways, meditation in some or the other Buddhist style, or contemplation inspired basically by Neoplatonic traditions. Those who prefer, on the contrary, the clarity of mind to its peacefulness might, despite the general confusion, or rather because of it, suggest instead exercising more intensively our logical faculties. Others, perhaps more attentive to general rather than personal affairs, would perhaps insist that the pause that is imposed nowadays in many domains of daily activities by the pandemic condition should be dedicated to rethinking dogmas and habits and consequently correcting our ways of dealing with other persons, other human groups, other species, human traditions, natural environment, or supernatural being. All the suggestions seems to me to express the pre-existing ideas and ideas of their makers. They remind me of the calls made traditionally by religious leaders on occasion of plagues and other catastrophes to stop sinning, repent, and adopt the religiously correct way of life. Catastrophes, whether disastrous and whether just astounding, necessitate sometimes readaptation and provide occasion for re-evaluations. Yet, you may look at text 1 if you want to follow me. The immediate effect is confusion and uncertainty, a state of mind that bother those who need clarity and security. Religious preachers, no more than political propaganda makers and commercial advisors, often try to take advantage of it by offering the ready-made packages as reliable remedies. The claims about the beneficial effect of the remedies may indeed be made in good faith. The tactics may serve some good cause, yet their pretension to know and provide clarity and security that is based on such knowledge is nevertheless false. Philosophers whose common ground is a struggle against unjustified claim to knowledge should not join them. Here, text 2 can okay. I wouldn't argue in the present context with philosophers that prefer in general Stoic values and ideals to other conceptions of good life, more than I would argue with religious preachers that in normal times prefer, say, Jewish to Christian conceptions of good conduct. Stoicism, like Spinozism, presupposes a fixed order of things and recommends resignation to that order and acceptance of the personal difficulty to understand one's fate as a particular case of such an order, and wise management of actions and emotion in domains that are, according to that order, under one's control. In times of catastrophes, however, the presupposed order seems to be disturbed, and what is needed is reorientation, without which wise management is impossible, rather than resignation to the supposed order. In times of a general plight, moreover, the problem is not the misunderstanding of one's personal fate, and the issue is not keeping one's peace of mind, but rather keeping one's mind cool despite the general confusion, insecurity, and anxiety, a coolness which is needed for facing together common problems. Nor would I argue in the present context with those proposing a retreat to meditation or contemplation more than I would argue with a religious proposal to indulge in thoughts about God's greatness. Meditation, contemplation, and admiration of God's mysteries imply intellectual as well as practical inactivity, whereas the issue in confusing catastrophic time is what should be done and why. The fact that plagues as well as natural disasters, deep economic crisis, or wars detach people from some of their regular activities and worries doesn't mean that they are the right time to take a mental vacation. On the contrary, they raise moral and social as well as existential questions. If mundane moral questions such as whether and how to weigh the value of the lives of the elderly minority against the economic risk for the younger majority is not deep enough for the meditator or lofty enough for the contemplator, I wouldn't suggest, as I might have done in more normal times, to discuss abstractly, metaphilosophically, the proper level for the baseline of philosophy. I wouldn't, moreover, argue at that point with those who want to improve people's logical clarity and consistency. Clarity and consistency are sometimes very important, although I am not convinced that reasoning exercise are always a cure for confusion, uncertainty, and contradiction in everyday life, even when there is a prior phase in the clarity, certainty, and coherence of more basic presupposition. Under the perplexing condition of a catastrophe, many such presuppositions are called into question. Reasoning itself can be confused and confusing. The same applies finally to suggestions of pre-established agenda whose propagators are not aware that their basic assumptions are nowadays somewhat shattered. Thus, the ideas of self-knowledge and self-realization. In normal times, one can criticize the apparent ignorance of the work done during the last century by philosophers of various orientations, as various as phenomenology, existentialism, critical theory, analytic philosophy, as well as philosophical studies of problems of knowledge, self, language, society, and psychology, which exposed the difficulties, confusions, illusion, and contradiction within which those ideas are involved. The suggestion to see the pandemic crisis as an opportunity to arrive at a higher or truer level of such ideas continues, however, to take for granted, despite its relevance to the moral, social, and therefore also political question that come to the fore with the enhanced awareness of the impact of personal choices on the fate of other persons, and awareness of the problematic status of the ethical dogma, according to which self-centered ideals overrule all other values. Here you can pass to text 3. It applies as well to the ideals of universality of the opposite agenda, those demanding, in the name of unbiased justice, for example, to include on equal footing the widest circle of others in one's horizon of concern and cares, and those insisting on the contrary, on the autonomy and rights as well as of the specific values of minority groups. In more normal times, one could criticize the universalists for the underrating of particularist values such as solidarity with one's community, responsibility for relatives, and commitment to friends or partners, and criticize at the same time those whose cause is the group-related personal identity, who tend to assume that there is no multiplicity of opinions and variety of values within the minority groups. Under the catastrophic condition, when the interdependence of individuals and groups, as well as the danger of the clashing interests, are more accentuated, the very categories of universal and particular, dominant and minority group seem to be shattered with the emergence of questions of overcoming obstacles to cooperation and coexistence. As to agendas such as rights of animals, protecting the environment, putting an end to greedy capitalism, reckless liberalism, and godless relativism, etc., all the regular pro and con arguments are irrelevant when we do not know how the corona and its social effects are going to change our reality and our scales of preference, the real prices in terms of other goals of attaining such goals, and the real costs in terms of other values of protecting such values. The pre-established agendas are dogmatically biased and prevent the necessary attempts to cope with the actual dilemma of the catastrophic situation. So you can see it in text 4, which Kirill might show you. Do those remarks imply that in these times of corona, philosophy doesn't really matter? I would like perhaps take a look at picture 1. Please, Kirill, help me. Picture 1 is a picture where you see a chair and it's red. Sometimes I sit and think, and sometimes I just sit. I'll come back to it. My remark about the above-mentioned approaches reflect, of course, my personal disagreement with them. Individual philosophers are entitled, of course, to stick to their personal convictions, and their philosophical views may, for this or that reason, really matter to them personally. And if they are counselors, also to some of their counselees as well. But the question whether the philosophy really matters in times of a collective catastrophe doesn't refer to the personal state of mind of the specific philosopher or counselees. It refers to the general problems that are typical to catastrophic situations, such as, on the one hand, uncertainty and insecurity, and on the other hand, the general epistemic, moral, social, political, as well as existential dilemma that emerge with the attempts to cope with the problems.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. Take a look at the help section in your Alexa app.
Sorry, Google interfered me in the middle. So in the time where we have a general dilemmas that emerge in the under catastrophic circumstances, problems that to my mind should not be ignored even by philosophers that in normal times are preoccupied by other kinds of topics. I choose to start with critical attitude to approaches that are not my cup of tea, rather than exposing approaches that are closer to my personal conception of philosophy and philosophical counseling, because I think that philosophy does matter thanks to the philosophical tradition of challenging other philosophical approaches. All the above-mentioned approaches, as they are presented in conference about philosophical practice, seem to belong to philosophizing on the first level, where some popular beliefs and values are indeed called into questions, but so-called philosophical convictions are taken dogmatically for granted. Philosophy on higher levels, which consists of a participation in controversies and in which philosophical convictions are challenged, tries not to be dogmatic. This text 6, Kirill. Philosophy can really matter nowadays thanks to such readiness to endure journeys in the limbo of uncertainty and insecurity. It is, in a way, a readiness and tolerance for ignorance. Let me explain myself. Philosophizing, over and beyond my personal conception of it, always involved with disagreement, for philosophers are interested in questions that have no definitive answers. Some famous philosophers have indeed looked, like Descartes, for primary principles that are beyond doubt in order to find a basis for the construction of evident theory that would provide undebatable answer to philosophical questions. Other beliefs, like Plato or Hegel, that the ultimate answer would be attained at the end of a dialectic process, which starts not with the evident truths, but rather with confusion, contradiction, and errors. But gradually approach to true, coherent, and comprehensive knowledge, they would provide for correct answer to all practical as well as theoretical questions. Some famous modern philosophers in the analytic camp believe that debates would be overcome by correcting the questions rather than the answer. Some, and Marx and Heidegger are not the only one in this camp group, claim to have discovered the question that philosophers should ask, while regular philosophical questions are, according to their opinion, biased by a distorted cultural tradition or an ideology that seek to hide the real issues. Others, like Bergson and the very different Wittgenstein or the logical positivist, insisted in contrast that the questions that philosophers normally ask are pseudo questions, and the real question should be answered not by philosophical analysis and debates, but by intuitive insights, mystic experiences, linguistic production, or scientific research. Some, like the American pragmatists, suggested that the philosophical questions are reducible to psychological anxieties and needs, and the quest after rule answer should be replaced by satisfaction with useful belief. Others, like some existentialists, and this is not the end of the list, maintain that the issue is not finding true answer, but the making choices and decisions and taking the responsibility for them. As summarized in text 7, Kirill, all those seeking philosophers disagreed with each other as much as they disagreed with the skeptic and the relativistic philosopher. Yet they shared, both with the seekers and the skeptic, at least one thing in common. And in this respect, they differ from pseudo-philosophers whose philosophical positions are just dogma learned from others and accepted without questioning and without critical examination. They all share the suspicion of unjustified claims to knowledge. As otherwise said in text 8 here, they share, in other words, the readiness to acknowledge confusion and to go through periods of uncertainty and doubt. They share the tolerance for ignorance, which the holders of the approaches mentioned above seem to lack. So you may look again at the picture 1 if Kirill puts it on the third, and rethink it again. My conviction that a philosophical counselor can use insight borrowed from all those true philosophers, even if he does not share their philosophical position, is based on their tolerance for ignorance. My belief that philosophy can really matter in catastrophic situations is also based on that conviction. In such situation, we need acknowledgement of the general disorientation and tolerance for the general uncertainty. Briefly, text 9, Kirill. I do not try to suggest that scientists should neglect the duty to explore the condition of the pandemic catastrophe, investigate its causes, and search for cures. Nor that political leaders and public servants should neglect their responsibility for the public welfare. I do not claim that philosophers that are perhaps more aware of the possibilities that some other claim to knowledge is unjustified should deter people from obligation to try, despite the risk of errors, to offer a solution to the emerging practical problems. I insist, see text 10, on the other hand, that philosophers should mobilize their entire critical tradition in order to prevent unjustified pretension to knowledge and the propagation of fake and at least unprovable speculative theories about the allegedly true source of the plight and its allegedly real cure. Past religious as well as political leaders, both those in power and those that were oppressed, took advantage of wars, plights, and other catastrophes, blamed their enemies, rivals, and real or imaginary oppressors, and exploiter for the poisoning of wells and rivers, as I said at the time of the Black Death, prosecuted them, and incited dissatisfied, confused, and insecure masses against them. It is time for philosophers to pop out, or should I say, zoom out, of their academic towers and professional capsules and speak publicly against such attempts of building fake theories. It doesn't matter whether those attempts are made by cynic rulers like, should I mention, Trump and others, or hypocrite speaker of so-called dominant groups whose alleged privilege seem to be threatened, and whether they are made by naive fanatic speakers who pretend to defend the right of the unprivileged. It doesn't matter whether they are made by speakers of some groups of religious fundamentalists and whether they are made by their vehement opponents. It doesn't matter whether they are made by those who pretend to represent a cultural group, class, race, nationality, or gender that consider itself physically cleaner than those of the contaminated barbarians, in quotation marks, when they are made by those pretending to represent a morally or spiritually cleaner group. They are all false claims to knowledge. Tolerance for ignorance means also recognition that fruitful ideas can emerge from unexpected sources. It is a modesty to listen to others. If some of us want to return to the alleged wisdom of ancient Greek philosophers, we should remember the blindness of some of the dominant ancient Greek philosophers to ideas that were not developed among the contemporary, what they call barbarian cultures. It may mean, if we are talking in modern terms, the limited respect that the Greek paid to Egyptian and barbarian know-how, Anatolian divinities, or Canaanite alphabet, and the disdain and misunderstanding, if not complete ignorance, of ideas developed among Persian or Indians, Judeans or Arabians, Ethiopians or Swahilis, Celts, Teutonians, Scythians, Caucasians, Chinese or Japanese, or the remote Polynesian and America, Indian. So we don't have we have to be more modest than our predecessor Greek. The declared recognition by postmodern philosophers of the equal validity of the variety of alternative cultural traditions may encourage, on the contrary, intolerance to ignorance. It does it when it tries, as some so-called post-colonialists do, forbid examination, criticism, adaptation, or adoption by so-called appropriating outsider of the ideas and values of the so-called insiders. Tolerance for ignorance means openness to the possibility that some of the ideas of any group are flawed and some are insightful. An exchange of ideas through critical dialogue is beneficial. It is open to the possibility that cultural traditions have many contradictory facets, and an outsider may, just like an insider, point to them and prefer them to others, to the common benefit, especially in times of a common catastrophe, when cooperation between the different groups is essential. Tolerance to ignorance means, moreover, awareness to the possibility that two philosophical problems that may arise under the catastrophic conditions, and the problems I have in mind are mainly moral, social, and therefore also both political and existential. Coping with the catastrophe raises issues of solidarity and responsibility. The usual liberty of individuals and groups to choose their own ways of behavior may threaten the lives of other individuals and other groups. The care for the health of the more vulnerable may cost the freedom and the economic well-being of others. The needed intervention of the political authorities seem to surpass the limit of concessions that liberals are ready to make, and raises suspicion even of those who are more tolerant to authoritarian regimes. It creates a moral and political dilemma between compliance and disobedience, as a concentration of power in the hands of rulers and bureaucrats, theoretically only for better coping with the crisis, and hence the risk of the misusing it for other political purpose and perhaps still worse, their personal interest. The dilemma between solidarity with one's particular community and universal values becomes sharper as the leaders may try to fortify the cohesion of loyalty of their worried supporters by fake news, in particular, the invasion of common enemies, the exaggeration of danger of real foes, and the threatening otherness of minority groups. Hence also the emergence of the dilemma between unity and variety, and between conformity and uniqueness of subculture that in regular times enjoys some or other degree of autonomy, but under the catastrophic conditions are under stress to comply with the majority and live under eternal regulation against their own principles and without always understanding the reason for the external demands. Tolerance for ignorance may mean finally understanding of the understanding of the insufficiency of abstract analysis of philosopher and detached studies of scientists. It means, as I suggest in text 11, Kirill, the modesty of listening to other discourses, other debates about rules and criteria which dealt with such dilemma in concrete situations. Dialogues in novels, dramas, and movies may be relevant, but what I have in mind in particular are debate in real life, in juridical or religious ones, which means, as text 12 says, learning from authorities that philosophers normally disrespect. We can listen to debates among jurists that took place under catastrophic conditions about the spirit of the law, i.e. the interpretation of relevant existing laws or the constitutive legality of new emergency regulation. We can listen to past polemics under such conditions among religious guides, but the issue is a practical meaning of respecting divine will and dictates, or alternatively, following the models of justice, mercy, love, communal solidarity, or whatever is relevant, which are allegedly illustrated in the deeds of exemplary religious figures. All those debates are philosophical in nature, but they take place in concrete historical situations and therefore are less abstract than debates among philosophers, more sensitive to specific details of benefits and disadvantages, conflicting interests, values, and emotions. They are also involved with a higher level of personal commitment, for the issue is not just expression of personal opinions, but a matter of public responsibility. I do not suggest stopping being philosopher and accepting legal or religious authorities and the logic of precedents, that is, complying with the decision which were eventually taken in them by prior cases. On the contrary, I suggest listening to the variety of voices and trying to become a little wiser in light of the multiplicity of illustrations and consideration from perspectives that we do not normally share. Such a listening may help us think of better criteria for overcoming value conflicts and cope better with issues of cultural differences when some groups refuse to comply with the cautionary regulation because they prohibit traditional behavior that, according to popular opinion or the decision of their local leaders, are not only obligatory, but of vital importance in times of trouble. Let me finish with a concrete example. Some communities of ultra-Orthodox Jews and some Muslim communities in Israel opposed the regulations of keeping physical distance, for it interfered with the custom of praying, studying religious texts, feasting, or manning in big crowds. A custom whose observance is important in particular, according to their opinion, in times of a common disaster, again, against at least common popular tradition or the opinion of some of the actual religious guides. Observing such custom enhance, however, risk of contamination within those communities, the overburdening of the health system, and the accusation of those communities with spreading the disease to other parts of the population by others. Among both Jewish and Muslim religious important thinkers, there were some who thought that the duty to protect health and save life within as well as outside the community overruled some other duties, and in particular the alleged duty to observe traditional customs. Being acquainted with such a process enabled the members of those communities to adopt more cautious behavior despite the fact that their local leaders ignore such options. Tolerance of ignorance is also intolerance for accusation of popular opinion and leaders with ignorance of the richness of their own culture, its own options, and the duty to choose morally better alternatives. It is, to sum up, a tolerance for critical thinking of one's own culture and the opinion of its own alleged founding father, such as the non-barbarian in quotations Greek. It is tolerance to criticism of the new politically correct authority, which doesn't tolerate thinking critically of other cultures as well. Thank you.
Well, can you hear me? I'm Koshi from Goa, India. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Thank you for your very thought-provoking talk. My question is it that only when some such pandemic affects us that we become more empathetic towards other communities? I mean, the question is, are we in our present times of a market economy have become so insensitive to other communities that we need the onset of a pandemic to become more empathetic? Thank you.
I think that the questions becomes more urgent. I think that in these times we cannot just keep ourselves with our personal problems, and the issues become more prominent. And I think that as practical philosopher, we have to move more to the center of common problems, indeed. Whether the problem is capitalism or other problems, it's a question of debate. But I think that in these times, we really have to address general problems, social problems, understanding other communities, etc. And that we have, as I said, what I insisted on, really fight against the attempts of different groups and rulers and whatever to pretend false, unjustified pretension to knowledge and to be really aware of it. More than ever, I think. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. You as I'll ask you as some of you are doing philosophical practice. Did you have special personal issues in counseling? Did you continue the counseling during this period? Did you meet special or personal issue, or did you see that people are more perplexed by the general situation and worried about the general situation? What is your experience? I would be glad to get some feedback.
Well, I am not a philosophy practitioner. I actually a professor of philosophy who teaches in a university. But let me share with you all some personal experiences during the times. Since we also have students from other places, even abroad. Some of our students who have been here for some time, suddenly when this lockdown began in India, in Goa, where I stay, were a bit worried and anxious. Some of them wanted to go back to their homes, but that was not possible. So in a way, we became more, we developed a more personal sort of a relation than a mere academic interaction that we had till then. I mean, we made a group, WhatsApp group, exchanging even small talks, conversations, and I think we became more closer as human beings than we were earlier as mere academicians interacting with our students. So that's the query that I made. That does it require some such exigencies for us to be more humane? You know, that was my experience. But as I told you, I am not a philosophy practitioner. I teach phenomenology. I mean, philosophy of social sciences, Indian philosophy, and all to master level students. Thank you.
So you are dealing with philosophy, with common problems to begin with. What I was trying to stress that personal issues or question of self-understanding or understanding my faith or what is good life, what should I do in my personal life, are more central nowadays than questions that are the common problems that we have to cope with now, economic, interculturals, etc. I think that this is what philosophers should deal with nowadays.
Yes, I agree. I agree with you.
זאת הייתה שאלה היחידה. You ask whether she should become more emphatic to other communities. I think that as we have to cooperate with other communities, empathy is only one aspect. Yes, we need empathy, but we can also should be able to talk their language and to find within this community where we can challenge them. We challenge our own community, we challenge also other communities to adapt themselves to the new situation. And this is not a simple, this is not something simple, it's not mere empathy.
I wonder, Ora, maybe you could, what do you really mean by first level philosophy?
By first level philosophy, I mean that everybody has a worldview, and in first level philosophy, maybe this is a first level philosophy, and what I mean in first level philosophy in philosophical counseling is challenging some of the worldview of the views of the counsellors or the people we work with. But this is an easy thing, that some of their values, some of their... very often the people come with their own dogmatic philosophical convictions without exploring them. At second or higher level of philosophy, we discuss with each other, we challenge each other, and we call into questions those philosophical opinions, and this is philosophy on a higher level. It can go. I don't. It's very complicated to explain in one word. My distinction between different level of critical philosophy. But philosophy, I think that counseling should be on the level of critical philosophy, and the counselors should have a higher level of philosophy and the ability to challenge their own philosophical or colleagues' philosophical convictions and ask questions among them on higher level. And I think that I'm afraid that many, or at least some philosophical counselor come with not enough preparation or of higher level philosophy to challenge belief of their counsellors or the public, a preparation that is needed in all times, but especially needed in those times of Corona. And what we philosophers on higher level really is I repeat and repeat, it's the suspicions of unjustified claim to knowledge. One can be interested in epistemology or not interested in epistemology. It doesn't matter. The suspicion of unjustified claim to knowledge is common to philosophers, and I think that this suspicion should be very, very. First, the tolerance of the insecurity, not running into false consolation of religion or of religion like prophecies and the pretension to knowledge, and the pretensions of rulers and doctors and whoever to know and to deceive us and to take advantage of us. And I think that this is very, very important. This is, I think, part of the mission of philosophers in such times.
I did not have, well, yes, I had a philosophical consultation, but the issue was not specific to Corona. I had I don't know if I already commented this, but I had an experience before Corona on philosophical counseling, where the counselee was a person I knew many years from the philosophical cafe, and he died some 2 years ago. He told me in the counseling sessions, in the almost the first counseling session, that he was a travesti and that he had AIDS, and that he frequented a lot of people, and so dealing with this issue, we talked about that authenticity, which I thought was an issue that could be dealt with. But he interpreted this. We had many sessions. He interpreted not many, like maybe 6 or 8. He interpreted our conversations in the sense that he should tell everybody about his issue. And this, I don't think this was a right decision. I did not say this, but this was his interpretation of the conversation, and I felt uneasy. I felt I did not know if I should have told him in the beginning, let's not talk anymore, or what to do. And I think for some strange reason, many people who come to me to talk come up with such strange issues. They feel that they have to reveal these things that I would rather not hear, because it is a very strong problem. What would you do in such case? What would you?
Well, what do you mean?
I mean, a person who comes with a real problem. It's both an ethic problem and a personal problem. The personal problem is that he's doing something which is hidden, which is not socially admitted. On the other hand, he's infecting other people because he has AIDS and he is dying at the same time. Should I tell such a person, listen, this I cannot, which I know because he's a cafe participant. Should I tell him I cannot deal with this, but I should because I'm a philosopher? Or should I try to deal with him as I did, and then the result may be not so good because he interprets what he wants to interpret. and the problem is he thought this was led by me. Now I could say Sartre, it's bad faith, but that's not convincing to me.
But I'm not sure I understand exactly what the problem is, but if somebody today came to you and say that he is perhaps carrying the virus, the COVID-19 virus, and ask you whether to hide it or not to hide it, or would you have any hesitation to talk?
Yeah, that's a good thing. The parallel situation would be that somebody who is infected, who knows that he is infected, goes around. He tells me that he is going everywhere and infecting everybody, and that he does it because he thinks it really does not. He's not infecting them, really, and at the same time he hasn't some other problem, and what should one talk with such a person?
So the question is a moral question. Just what is it?
It's a moral question in the sense that I am supposed not to. One of the problems is that I'm supposed not to. This is a intimate, let's say, a private session, and I'm not supposed to reveal what is happening. On the other hand, he is infecting other people, which I might know.
Okay, this is an example of a moral question that we should deal with at that time. When our client, we know that he endangers, or we suspect that he endangers other people, do our loyalty or commitment to the client is more important than our commitment to our duties to the society we are living in. I think that this is the moral issue that is always important in for psychologists, lawyers, and philosophical counselor. But under the present conditions, it's even more urgent. This is an example of a question that comes to the fore, and we can argue among us. My opinion is that the public health is in this case more important than. But
the issue is that you really cannot do anything. Even if you know, you cannot go around and say he is infected. And if he wouldn't have said it, he would be infecting everybody anyway.
No, so, but as philosophers, you can challenge him. You can. You can challenge his convictions that he's not harming, or that he can do whatever he wants and not taking into consideration either. It's time. I think that in our time, it's correct, although this is not the client's question, to challenge people behavior. Yes. Philosophically, I'm not a cop. I'm not a government authority or whatever, but I think we should challenge people if we think that they engender others or themselves, for that matter. I think that there are issues that perhaps in normal times I would let pass, say to myself, well, should I not? I think that in times of a general crisis, we should be more aware of the public, of others' welfare, I think.
Yeah, but since we know the person, since in this case, the person would argue in the session, he would argue pros and cons, but then he would continue doing the same thing. So that is more what.
Is your unasked question is whether to tell about him to others, to share with others your knowledge? Is this your question?
No, my question is how to deal personally as a counselor with such situations. When after that he goes and he continues with his life, and you have all the thing here in your head.
But there is a limit to what to your responsibilities to the deeds of other persons. But you cannot impose your opinions on somebody else, but you can challenge. And that's what you are doing in philosophy, challenging the opinions. And I think that the public interest is more important, I think, in such situations than, to my mind, I don't know, Georgia, you are dealing with people. What's your opinion about that? Maybe I'm not pronouncing your name, Jorge, you called Jorge, or you are dealing with such issues.
Are you talking to me, George?
George, how do you pronounce it? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe George in English.
Okay. Okay, George, you are, I see, I get in my Facebook you all the time. What's your opinion?
Do you want me to talk about a specific topic?
No.
Or in general?
No, come and raise the question about if counsel is going to contaminate other, perhaps, and he refuses to acknowledge it or to take a... Where are you with this? What would you do?
Okay. I don't have that that idea and that reality, because in the past 3 months, I only work online consultation. Now I'm beginning in personal consultation, and with all the rules of security, with the distance of 2 meters, and with the alcohol in the hands, and with these 2 questions, I think we don't have problems. I don't know any information about this issue.
No, I'm not asking about your personal danger. We know that people work Zooming now. But if a client comes to you and tells you that he is carrying the virus, but he doesn't care and he's going to do whatever he wants, would you interfere with this? How would you interfere with this?
Oh, okay, I understand now. So you want to know if I accept the consultation and what kind of work I will do with that person?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I accept the consultation because we have the rules of security. And after that, I work with all the critical thinking about that topic. I didn't have a person like that yet, but I think it is very important to understand all the world of that person. For example, if that person has the problem in the community or in the family or in the work, that's the first work I will do. Then I will try to help the person. But you asked me if the person don't want to go to the hospital. That's the point. Yes or no?
Carmen gave an example that a person carrying a dangerous virus is not cautious and doesn't want to be cautious, not to contaminate other persons. What do you
the person don't want to go.
Don't want to be careful.
Okay, don't want to
Don't
be careful.
care about what happened to others.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
Okay.
interpret if he doesn't raise it as his problem?
So we need to ask the person the reason. Can you imagine an answer of that person? If I ask the person why you don't care, can you imagine one answer, one possible answer?
The answer is that he thinks that he doesn't really infect others, even though everybody knows that by now that he is contagious.
I don't know if I understand the main point. Can you turn more evidence of that case?
Carmen, can you?
I gave another example from years ago about somebody who had AIDS, but it's a similar situation. He had sex with other people in a promiscuous
Yes.
way, and he was convinced that he was not infecting others, that the possibility, the chance was very little, so it didn't matter.
Oh, okay.
And an important thing is also that after all the conversations we had, he continued his life as if we never had spoken. And,
Okay.
and we knew him because he was a participant of the Philosophical Cafe. So that's why I kept seeing him and knowing what was happening.
Okay, I understand. So we have here an interesting case of critical thinking, of course, a fallacy. The topic here, I think, it is an interesting relation between the theory, the work you are doing in theory, in philosophical theories, and then the link between the theory and the practice. So you can question the person, you can work the person on theory, but in practice, the person will do another thing. That's it. So I think we must go to the personal life, not to the big philosophical questions in a universal way, but to the personal life of the client. And so I think if you do that, maybe you can make a deeper link between theory and practice. That's the way I work.
And what's the obligation to whom the obligation in this time? The obligation to the client, to the counselee, or the obligation to the others that can be harmed by him?
Yeah, to the client first of all, I think you can try a thought experiment. For example, using the stories, using imagination, and try to put the person, the client, in the middle of the work. And I think with the imagination you can work more deeper.
Yet I want to challenge this, and I think that in some time there are times where you should be more aware of the harm your counseling can cause others than the loyalty to the counsel.
Yes, that's it.
So that's what I mean, that there are more important things nowadays than some of the personal problems. Guru, did you find that people have other issues now than?
Yes, but you know, I don't work with single people. I only work with groups. And nowadays, I've been working with a whole school with 100 teachers. So it's a very, very different way of working. And of course, they have, but their issues is not really about themselves. Of course, it's about their students and their role as teachers.
Mhm.
So I don't think it's kind of outside the discussion here, I feel, because it's already, I feel they are already working on social issues, not personal issues, but social issues.
Mhm. And so I don't ask the other because I don't know them. Alexandra, did you did you see any difference in counseling now than in counseling in normal times? Did you hear me? No.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, or are you talking?
Yeah, I asked you in your practice, did you find did
Got
you
it.
notice a difference now than in other times in what intrigues the people and what issues they bring with them?
Mhm. So I haven't worked with an individual clients during this period, as well as the previous speaker. I was working with groups of teenagers. So it was, and it was all remote, and then given also this situation. So we were not really looking at the personal issues. We're more looking at some like general philosophical problems. So over this specific period of time, yeah, I just don't have the relevant experience to report, and that's why I've been also taking that issue. I'm more interested to see what the others who have been actively doing this have to say. Yeah, because I mean, when on the with those groups, yeah, and the kind of issues that we've encountered, they were more about maintaining the quality of interpersonal communication while discussing philosophical ideas, rather than the kind of what we've been discussing. So yeah, sorry, I just don't think that I have anything of substance to add to this particular at this particular moment of the discussion.
Okay.
Can I add something, Ora?
Yes,
Actually, my problem is kind of the opposite, because I struggle to get teachers to speak from themselves and think from themselves, because they seem to always be at a distance to themselves as persons, and not they're not used to work on themselves as human beings to become but so in one way my challenge is kind of the opposite.
Yeah, and see, this moment I'm looking, there are some churches here, Abhishek Shukla, if I pronounce that. The first task of philosophical counseling is challenge belief of counseling, which led him to transmit a disease to others. First attempt should be to upgrade worldview. A counselor should work on belief system of counseling. If counseling succeed in his work, problem will be solved. This is about Abhishek Skulka. Then he writes, but here counseling sessions don't seem working. Disclosure can be made if laws allow. This case is very similar to medical ethics. issues where a balance needs to be maintained between clients' right to privacy and general public interest. Do you agree with this? I do.
No, I rather thought that it was strange that your approach is not many people use your approach, while it is theoretically consistent. And in some way, I try to use it in the way it's possible for me.
Yes, but I think that my personal approach to philosophical counseling is not very relevant here, except for one thing, that my departure point is really that we shouldn't be committed to falsified, to unjustified claim to knowledge. And this is what gives us permission to challenge opinions, to challenge philosophical conviction of people, not because I know the truth, but because they don't know it either, and they can think otherwise than they are thinking now. So maybe if they think otherwise, they can see solutions to issues that they don't see now. This is my point of departure. So as a philosopher, I'm not pretending to have going out of the cave and seeing the true sun of truth, but rather that philosophical presuppositions are not necessary truths, and sometimes they are hindering us from seeing ways, seeing problems otherwise, and moving from where we are to other places. This is my experience with philosophy and philosophy of science. But now I'm talking of time of confusion. It's not that I know which I suspect which opinions are unjustified, which opinions are wrong. We are living in time of confusion, insecurity, uncertainty, and we have to cope with it. And I think that as philosophers, we are trained to cope with it. I mean, if you're a true philosopher in the sense that ready to examine your own presuppositions, to examine your own opinion, in this I mean philosophy on a higher level, if you are in this place, you can be more tolerant to uncertainty, and we have to, I think, to help others to be tolerant to uncertainty in such days. And this is my main point. It is tolerance that we don't know we don't know the reasons, we don't know what's going to happen, yes, but we can cope with it, despite it, and not run away to force consolations of religious promises, meditations, I don't know what. We have to cope with the situation, and we can cope, although it's unclear, confusing, and the common order is not the same order anymore, and so forth. And that, I think, our mission today.